like he won't just respond like, go check this out. He'll like give you links for actual articles that explain it. So he's an incredible resource. He works for Leadership Network, and maybe you can kind of share what you do for Leadership Network. But I've invited him tonight just to create an open forum opportunity, because I think DJ does a great job of kind of following some of the, I don't want to call it trends, but movements within Christianity. He has probably met with most significant leaders of the church across the board. He can answer questions about technology. He's also done research when it comes to like ethnic churches. Yeah, I don't know what he hasn't done. So he's very well informed, and I thought he'd be a good person to kind of start off our conversation, just kind of catch up everybody, like what's going on. Maybe you had some inclination or some questions about your given situation, or you're curious about what's happening in the overall church. He would be a good guy to just kind of toss questions at, and we'll kind of interact. And so, DJ, why don't you kind of share a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Okay. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. It's a joy to see the next generation rising up, and God is calling you out to really be a part of His kingdom. There's a huge gap in the church that's just not connecting with young adults. So it's really encouraging to see that there's a whole new crop and a new thing that God's doing. Let me give you a point of reference of some of the things that I've done, and then I'll try to facilitate some conversations and see what God's doing in your hearts. Sounds like everyone's got the connection to Charles, so he's really the lifeline here. That's awesome. So you have an extensive network as well. My background is I was born in Taiwan to a traditional Chinese family and came to the U.S. when I was 8. So in Korean vernacular, that might be like 1.5. So I do speak some Mandarin, but I don't advertise, and try to keep that in my back pocket. Let's see. What's worth saying? So my undergrad, I went to school at Virginia Tech in computer engineering, and then felt a call to ministry after 3 years working as an engineer, and packed everything up and went to Dallas Theological Seminary for 5 years. So I have a Master of Theology from Dallas. I met my wife there. So graduated from seminary on a Saturday, graduated on Saturday, got married on Sunday.
Wow.
And then we kind of took on life. Kind of like, no. So I started ministry as a youth pastor, 2 years in a Chinese church, 3 years as an associate pastor in a more second generation, multi-ethnic, Korean, Chinese, and other kind of church.
What year is this?
This is the 97 to 2000. Moved back to Northern Virginia, and we spent the next 10 years there. I have a son who's now 12, just finished 6th grade, and we actually, let's see. So the last 10 years in the Washington, D.C. area, I left the pastorate and started working more in the parachurch realm. So my role is kind of like Angela when I was finishing my pastoral season, kind of the utility player. Just did whatever the senior pastor wouldn't do. And it was a smaller church, about 150. And then the next 7 years, I was working more in parachurch. American Bible Society was my main job. So I moved from marketing to software development to donor development. And then at the same time, I had a job with a private family foundation, which was developing, which still is, developing leadership and legacy for Asian Americans. And so I had this unique vantage point of seeing both the donor side and then also the nonprofit side of how that whole funding engine works. And then the last 3 years, I've been with Leadership Network, which is connecting innovators to multiply their kingdom impact. And then we moved out here to Orange County 2 years ago, because my wife is from Huntington Beach, and so she's been wanting to move back, and for the sake of the marriage, we moved out here. So I've been out here 2 years. The way I describe my role with Leadership Network is I have three roles. One is working with digital initiatives. So I talk with church leaders and ministry leaders around the country to see how they're using technology, mostly web technology, and how they're using that to facilitate ministry, which includes social media, but there's also a growth of internet campuses, which New Song has, and some other things they're exploring, just like church at large. Secondly, I also connect next-gen Asian American leaders. So my focus there is looking for Asian Americans who are leading their own churches in English. So I found over 100 of those around the country, which is pretty neat to see. And then thirdly, I connect multi-site churches in more than 2 locations. And there's coming up on 3,000 of those around the country. So those are the kind of things I do formally. The way I see myself is I connect people to people and connect people to resources. And so I tend to be this researching, ideating, networking kind of guy. So it's hard for me to focus, but I like to dabble in a lot of things. So I was chatting with Brian. He has this background in human development. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the things that I've found myself naturally gravitating towards in my normal life and not school life. So it's a fascinating time to be because our culture is just changing so much faster than it ever has been. And you mix that with multiculturalism, as they call it in school, and then globalism, as they call it in the world. These are very interesting, but also very exciting times. So that's my point of reference in how I see the world. What can I start with?
That's fine. So you guys want to throw any questions at DJ, and it can be, I can see he has a real wide breadth of knowledge in regards to some of those things. So anybody want to start?
Did you say you discovered 100 younger, or you found?
I found them.
I thought you meant maybe you helped launch them or something. You discovered that they were already pastoring and kind of connected them together.
Connecting in an informal way. I haven't brought them all together in a conference or anything, but I've been researching through word of mouth as well as through the web. Those are kind of my 2 main tools of research. And then this cool. Index. Yeah. Because previous, if you look 10 years back, previous to that, there were very few English-speaking Asian-led churches.
Did you find that there was a lot of resistance to you just initiating, or just were they not open?
Yeah, in my 9 years ago when I was just starting, people didn't really know who I was. And they wouldn't need to, but yeah, people were kind of cautious, and just networking wasn't as open of an idea before. So people kind of want to know who you are, and they don't have that trust yet. I think as I've been consistent in doing this over the years, that God's opened more doors, and having an organization behind you helps. Yeah. And then I think the next generation is much more open to networking. And one of the key issues, I guess now that you've left college, you might be experiencing that in the work of ministry, it's very isolating, because oftentimes you're one of the few leaders in the church context, and there are things that you have to keep to yourself as a leader. And one, it's very isolating. 2, for the next generation, the number one need as I network and try to facilitate leadership development is the number one need is they're looking for a role model or a mentor. So what Charles has stirring in his heart is very, very much the pressing need that we have as young leaders. So I'm glad you have this opportunity to connect with each other, but also with some others that may have a few years ahead. coach you along.
You tweeted last night about something. Yeah, pretty much. I don't follow that many people. You tweeted last night about online church, and somebody said something. John Piper said something. Somebody said something.
What did John Piper say?
Something about online church and how it could possibly lead to something. I don't remember exactly what he said. Could you expand on that a little bit?
I just linked to it, so.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read it. That's what I'm saying, dude. Oh, dang it.
I skim a lot of things,
Right,
so
right.
sometimes I saw that was an interesting piece. I think John Piper, he's a little more traditional in his theology.
There's an
Much
understatement.
more.
There's an understatement.
No, there's a lot of traditional
He's
pieces.
new, dude. He's new Calvinist.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
But, let's see. His concern was the online church, of which there are about 30 of them now in the U.S. So
Could you define that for us? I mean,
Yeah, what does that mean?
Online church is typically they're a multi-site church that will hold a online church service by streaming video with worship music and sermon, and then they usually add a lobby for chat and maybe some interactive buttons.
Do you have like your own avatar and stuff?
Some of them do have avatars. I was on this one online church in Florida, and they do it live. So some of the online churches actually pre-record the sermon, and then they play it during a set time. Well, this one church in Florida does have avatars, and then I was signed in, and you have to sign in with a profile and everything. And then the I guess you call it MC, or the moderator of the service, calls out my name to the thousands of people that are in that auditorium. So I was like, wow, I've never experienced anything like that. So they actually try to make a seamless worship experience for the people that were live in the auditorium along with the people online watching.
Wow.
So anyways, so the line between online and offline are beginning to blur a little bit. But back to John Piper, he had a concern that I think it was about something about spiritually dysfunctional.
yeah.
Or having a disembodied community was of great concern to him.
Yeah, what do you think about that? What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I disagree because I think you and I, or all of us, have had relationships in real life where we don't get past the surface, and all of us have had relationships where you find out the person that you thought you knew had this whole other life.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's been a couple of recent incidences that are coming to light. It's just shocking. So and then online, I mean, people can hide there as easily as they can in person, but people also reveal themselves a lot more online. And so it can go both ways. And a lot of my relationships, or actually, I have relationships in real life. I don't like the term, but I have relationships offline and online, and they're both deep. And I can, Charles is one of my online relationship that's become offline. It's become seamless. A handful of others. God's really used the online world to connect me with people around the country.
So I guess my follow-up of that would be then, do you see churches using like online as a tool to kind of to bridge that, hey, this is what we do, that kind of a tool, or do you see it as a, hey, we can connect here too, and that's fine, that kind of a thing? Should it be like a connection bridge, or like a this is our bridge?
Both are happening. So some churches see their online campus or their online presence as a feeder into their physical churches, and then others are just creating the space and meeting people where they're at, and building relationships there, doing discipleship there, doing baptism afar. A few churches have figured out how to do communion online. So sky's the limit. It's still very much uncharted territory. So people are trying things. Now there's one church that was in England that tried to do an online church with avatars, and it was a year experiment, and it didn't really take. I'm not sure why, but so if you just have avatars, I guess it's disembodied, and so that might be too far removed. You don't get the real interaction. And there's a church at Second Life too, so yeah. Life Church in Oklahoma. Yeah, they have a Second Life church. There's animals that are worshiping. It's weird. Yeah.
Hey DJ, what would you say are the top 3 networking tools, and then the top 3 qualities that you as a person have developed over the years to be a good networker? What are those for you?
That's a great question. Part of it is I'm realizing this is something that I don't consider myself a natural leader, so I've kind of had to work hard and adapt a lot of the language that people use in the leadership pep talks. And one of the things that leaders don't talk about too often is the aspect of giftedness. I think there's a part of networking that's just a gift God's given me. And so while I try to break it down, there's just that one aspect that's just a gift. And that's not to boast, but that's just to acknowledge that
right.
I can give you the 10 points, but there's that gift aspect that God's given me that I'm using. But I did think about this a little bit a couple years back. In terms of tools I use my phone, email, and then social networks, primarily Twitter and Facebook. The tools themselves aren't really what makes it work. It's connecting with the people and where they're at. And so when I need to connect with ethnic Asian churches, I have to pick up the phone and I have to set up a tea meeting and talk to them face to face, because nothing else will work. And so depending on where your audience and your community, where they hang out, you go to meet them. It's kind of a John 4 idea, right? John 4, I'm misquoting. It's in John that you move into the neighborhood. It's a Young Life passage. I'm not Young Life. You move into the neighborhood and you incarnate, and you meet people where they're at. So if your community hangs out on Facebook, go to Facebook. If they hang out at MySpace, go to MySpace. Where else do people hang out? Verb. Some people hang out on Verb. Some people hang out on FriendFeed. When I was youth pastor, this was way in the early stages when AOL was the big deal. And I was trying to get my youth to connect on Instant Messenger because I didn't want to just see them on Friday evening and Sunday morning. I know a lot of life happens during the weekdays.
When were you thinking about this? Like in
95, 97. Yeah. I mean, everybody had them, but it turns out kids don't really use that. Especially now, they use text messaging mostly, right? Yeah. Or is that moving?
I think they do both. They'll be in front of their computer with their phone and their simultaneously.
Yeah, because with the text message, it's only one-to-one. Whereas if you're on IM or chat, you get multiple. So finding the right tool that matches your community is the first big piece. And then secondly, and I'm not real good at this because I tend to be spontaneous, but the best practice of networking is you want to make a contact at least twice a year, or once a quarter, or once a month, depending on the depth of the relationship. And then as you grow that relationship through regular contact, then opportunities open up where you can help each other. And you want to bring value to the relationship. So I tend to lead with questions on what are they doing, what are they dreaming of, and then my role as connector is to connect them to other churches, connect them to other people, connect them to resources, connect them to articles. So, those would be the first couple things I think of. The other thing I'll mention is this meeting wouldn't have happened without somebody that called the party. Or to use a more engineering analogy, a network doesn't run without a hub. So someone has to be at the center or in the middle to connect everybody else. One of the things that's disappointing for me is conferences will often say, hey, this is a great conference because you'll get to be networking with people. Conferences can provide the space for it or the opportunity for it, but people don't just naturally network. Somebody has to kind of draw it together, and someone has to play that role to keep that network going. The idea of a grassroots organic thing, it could happen, but it rarely does. Yes.
We're part of an ethnic church, obviously, and
Obviously.
Okay.
obviously, yes. What have you noticed in the evolution, I guess, of ethnic churches in regards to adapting to the society, like language-wise?
Right.
Like at our church, we have youth that are growing that speak in English. Our main service is done in Armenian, but there's a gap that's never been there, the 20s and 30s, and we're growing into that, and we really don't know how to deal with it. Some people have ideas of integrating them into the main service, which is Armenian. Some people don't. So, like, what have you seen happen, I guess, from your interaction? And what could happen?
Well, ethnic churches, whether it's Armenian or Asian, or even in conversations I've had with Latino and African American, there's definitely a cultural inertia and gravity to preserve the values of tradition and culture.
Yeah.
And so there's a tendency with the older leadership to try to pull in the younger generation into the traditional culture. And the thing is, we're in an American context, and we're in a global context now where it's more and more challenging to pull people back towards tradition. You can value traditions, but to quote unquote force or expect people to just come to that is an uphill challenge. What has been more helpful for churches is to meet the next generation where they're at. So if they need space to develop their own church, get behind that and plant a new church. If they need to have a contextualized worship service, develop one to reach them rather than get them to uphold a tradition. That's a better way to go. You really have to think kingdom and reaching people for Christ rather than holding on to tradition. So to quote Erwin McManus, he says something like, "Do we love our tradition more than our children?" And he's ethnic, right? So.
Let me speak for the Koreans, yes.
But yeah, it's hard.
How have you seen, like, say, people in that kind of setting where the leadership may not think of it that way? What are some of the common consequences of that kind of setting, where you have younger people, leaders that may see more overall kingdom-minded, kind of expanding out, and yet the leadership may never possibly change?
Yeah. So across the board, if the leadership holds on to the traditional culture rather than trying to figure out how to reach people where they're at, then those churches inevitably will decline and die. So whether it's white or not white, there's a natural life cycle of churches. And so when you just hold on to traditions, there's going to be a natural death, if I can say it that way. And the second thing that's probably a little more obvious is just churches have a huge gap in the 20-somethings. They're not coming to church because it's not relevant. It's not connecting with them. And I mean, I'm 40 now, but I'm not sure how older people think in terms of, well, human nature. Okay, human nature. That we all have something that's within our comfort zone, and traditions over time become a security blanket.
Sure.
So maybe that's a big part of it. Actually, we just saw Star Trek 6, so that was a tradition versus progressive kind of thing. But when I lost my train of thought. But when you hold on to tradition, you lose people. Then you lose people. Anyway, I lost my thought. But the consequence is you lose a whole generation. So the churches die, you lose a whole generation, and then you have a post-Christian culture like you have in Europe. To draw it out now.
DJ, you were saying your vantage point is pretty unique, just kind of hearing the background. Do you see young leaders leading communities of faith like our age? Do you see that working out? I mean, I think sometimes there's this kind of template of young church. Do you see young leaders leading churches?
Yeah, there's some. I think the number of young leaders leading their own churches isn't keeping up with the population growth. Mm-hmm. So you've got this whole hemorrhaging from traditional church, and a pretty dramatic dropout rate or attrition rate. Once kids leave youth group and go to college, they leave church.
Yeah.
And that's Asian and non-Asian.
Sure.
The stats are anywhere from 80 to 90% across the board. There are exceptions, but that's a serious issue.
I mean, do you see like successful? I don't even know how you define successful, but do you see like younger leaders like under 30 or around 30? Do you see them pulling it off? I mean,
yeah, there's some that are pulling it off, and they come in different models. Some are very large churches, some are smaller house church kind of things, and then everything in between. Just that the number of them are few, comparatively few.
What would you suggest? What would you recommend? Like for two young people who wanted to plant a church at 26?
Get some good people around you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of people interested in raising the next generation.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've noticed 10 years out from seminary is there's this resurgence, how do you call it? Resurgence, or this whole growth and conversation about church planting. Mm-hmm. So there's well over
it's like a buzz
50,
right now. Everyone's talking about
it. Well over
transitions in the air.
50 plus church planting networks.
Yeah.
So if you tap into those resources and launch well. It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's very hard work. I mean, even Dave Gibbons will tell you it's the hardest thing he's ever done, planting New Song. And he's a very gifted leader, so I mean, if it was hard for him, it's hard.
Thanks.
It's hard. Charles could probably talk about some of his church planting, but get all the help you can.
Yeah.
They're all success stories.
We
only share our success stories.
I think the scripture that helps me with why we need to plant new churches is Jesus talking about old and new wineskin.
Sure.
I think it's Luke's translation that really helped me. It's on one of my PowerPoint slides, which I don't have, so I can't pull on it. That new wine needs new wineskin, and old wine needs old wineskin. If you establish both will be preserved. And that little phrase helped me to realize, okay, rather than blowing up the old traditional church and trying to make that change, allow that to be the way it is, and give freedom and empower new things to happen also, and then both will be preserved, both will thrive. So rather than think zero-sum game, think both and. Think reproduction. Think reaching people. And so I've been shifting my own language that way, rather than saying, here's the problems of ethnic church and here's what they got to do. When when we focus on problem, it just kind of raises everybody's defenses. Simply, if we can shift our thinking and say, hey, people need Jesus. We need to own our faith. So,
I guess kind of my next question would be, I mean, from that same vantage point that you have, you're seeing two lines in denominational. I mean, is it all about networks? I mean, should we really be depending on the denomination to resource us, or should we be looking toward maybe just some more organic network?
no, there's new networks that are non-denominational. Well, there is denominational, but there's also these new networks, new associations.
Like
Yeah.
Acts 29 or
Acts 29 is a network. I can get you a whole list of them.
Yeah.
There's a conference in end of March called Exponential,
Oh yeah.
or the National New Church Conference, and that's like the mother of all church planting conferences. So all the networks show up there, and you get to meet them, and they get to meet you, and then you can get on the way.
Exponential National Church Planning.
Exponential Conference
Exponential
is the name.
conference.org.
You so, you kind of like get to travel around and see
Right.
all the new things coming up. But what are some new innovative, maybe not innovative, but new ways? What are some of the new wineskins that you're seeing pop up? Because I really think that the younger generation is going to start creating these new models of churches. We're going to go away from the traditional sense. Is there any new wineskins that you've seen that looks very promising?
New wineskins that are developing that I'm seeing. I think the multi-site church is still growing. I'm actually taking a road trip up to Northern Cal this weekend to look at a couple of multi-site churches. Plus, I'm multi-site church director at Leadership Network. So we still see that as kind of one of the main conversations happening at pastors' conferences. The church planting and multi-site are very much on people's radar, and they're really seeing a lot of opportunity there and a lot of energy. And so those two things are really hot. Probably the new frontier is online church or internet church. People are seeing that as a low-hanging fruit because it costs a lot less to pull that off than buying a building and all that stuff. Global.
Say that again. Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit. It's a business term. Angela will help here, but in the business world, they try to they look at all kinds of opportunities and try to find the ones that are that have a higher success rate and are less cost to pull off.
And what are you saying is low-hanging fruit?
Internet.
Who are
Internet
some of
church.
the bigger voices in the internet church, like right now, that are really doing a good job or taking the more innovative ways?
Well, the pioneer is Life Church in Oklahoma City. I mean, they have a whole team of developers called Digerati. So they have a handful of guys that just get to focus on developing their own tools and trying new things. So they're the people behind uversion.com, which is a new webby kind of a Bible. And then they just launched a new thing called Babble With Me, where you have a chat room that could translate instantaneously into 45 languages. So you can actually talk to people around the world and be able to communicate. Yeah. So they're definitely pioneers, and then there's a few others. New Hope in Hawaii is a pioneer in streaming video.
Yeah.
So this past weekend, they were the first church to stream their worship service on an iPhone.
Wow.
So I tuned in. And I was like, hey, it works.
That's crazy.
Foursquare. Yeah, they're Foursquare.
They're fun.
So there are two of the pioneers. There's a few others. So out of the 30, there's probably 5 or 10 that are pretty pioneering. Not to say the others are copycats, but they're all pioneering because there's not out-of-the-box solutions yet, although there's someone that's coming up with it. So internet church, and then the other one is global church. Because of technology and because we are in a global world, churches are, rather than just planting a church from scratch, churches are realizing, okay, once a church has established its vision and DNA, it's easier to replicate it in some ways than to start from the ground up scratch. And so there's a handful of churches that are intentionally looking at planting their multi-sites internationally, New Song included. New Song included. I just interviewed a pastor last week from Ann Arbor, and he's moving to Jakarta for a year to plant a new site out there. It's more of a college campus-centered kind of a church. So once you've got a model, then it's either replicate it and to build another model, I think is the thinking. And you kind of run with that until the model kind of runs its course.
It's a common mission strategy.
Yeah. And then because of technology, the next generation have a lot more in common culturally. So two of the leading church planning strategies are multi-site and then reaching colleges and young adults. Because young adults in, let's say, in Paris, in New York, have more in common than Oklahoma, than kids in the rural area. And so that's Redeemers. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not sure that's it. So there's an urban cosmopolitan mindset in world-class cities. So that's kind of Redeemer churches planting strategies. They want to go to world-class cities and build these upperly mobile urban churches. City center churches is what they call them. And then Acts 29 has an idea. And New Song has an idea. I mean, New Song is what? Bangkok, London, Mexico City. Seoul's coming online. India's coming online, right? So.
Mexico City.
But, yeah. Those are a few. Yeah. So one of the things I get to do is kind of keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in the church broadly, but more from a layman, non-academic perspective. So the academic researchers, they really want things to be a lot more grounded, whereas I can be more broad paintbrush. So tell me more about your ministry aspirations as you finish school now and you're hands-on into ministry. What are the opportunities that excite you, and what are the challenges that you're facing?
Well, here's one thing I wanted to ask you, and this applies to my ministry here. It's about bridging generation, the gap, and I'm wondering if you have any practical, I guess, points in getting the older generation to see the value of being led by younger people.
Ooh.
And
wow.
I mean, obviously the whole mentor relationship, that's important. It's easy for them to tell us what to do and whatnot. But what about the younger generation leading them seeing the value of that? How can we get to that point?
That's a hot question. Boy.
Do you have experience with that?
I don't have experience hands-on, but because it's a fast-moving world, actually corporations and business world tend to be more of a leading edge for us to see what's happening in culture and what will tend to percolate down to church. So one of the newer things that's happening in the corporate world is reverse mentoring.
Yeah.
And there's actually a book by that title written for church leaders.
Oh wow.
By Earl Krebs, C-R-E-P-S, published by Leadership Network. I think that will get the conversation going, because you want to be able to reference something to get that conversation going, because just going face to face sometimes is perceived too confrontational or whiny. But if you can refer to a third party or a neutral party, then that might open up the conversation.
Book name again?
Reverse Mentoring by Earl Krebs, C-R-E-P-S. And he's a church planter now. So he used to be an academic professor type, and then after he went empty nest, then he's taken that leap of faith and planting a church in Portland, I think, Portland, Oregon. So,
have you heard of the book "Who Stole My Church" by I don't remember his name, something McDonald.
Gordon McDonald?
Gordon, yeah, thanks. And he was talking about, and I'm kind of having a hard time with this. He was saying the people on the traditional side, obviously, some people, it's just not a good fit with it. They won't fit in with maybe the new changes and things going on, and you just gotta let them go. And of course that happens, but I'm thinking, how can we? I'm just stuck on we still got to care for every generation, and just say, you can't just say, hey, they're traditional, forget it, and so, I don't know.
Oh, we can?
But
well, here's a more close to the ground example. Last weekend, I was at a National Vietnamese Americans church conference thing, and what I found hopeful in that context is both generations are very sensitive about being respectful of both and affirming of both. And so,
The Vietnamese?
yeah, the Vietnamese Americans, so first and second generation, they're at a joint worship session that's like over 2 hours long, and it's hot in the gymnasium, and people are just people are sticking through it, and there's a biblical concept of long suffering and forbearance. I think they demonstrated that, not just with the environment. I'm not trying to be funny. Right? That's how you want to do it. So they're sharing stories with each other about their journey to America, and then the younger kids are sharing their aspirations and dreams, and being respectful of the older generation and how they pioneered and made opportunities for them. And so there's a verbal and expressed desire to keep that connected in some way. And so that was a beautiful thing. I've not seen that in Chinese or Korean context as a compare contrast. So the Southeast Asians that are newer to the American scene, they've kind of learned from the mistakes of those of us who've been around a while, and we're really working harder at being respectful, caring for the older, and allowing them to live with dignity, but also with gratitude for what they've done. And we really stand on their shoulders, and it's acknowledging that. And then for the older generations to also acknowledge there's a new thing happening, and the kids need freedom to fly, and then be pushed out of the nest. Because one of the things that, well, I'm going off message now, but one of the things I see in some ethnic Asian churches, particularly Korean and Chinese, is the second generation will kind of stay in the traditional church because it's become a comfort zone and just kind of stunt their own growth, and they never really own their faith because they've never had to take care of the bill, take care of the building, take care of ministry. And so that becomes the problem the first generation sees with the second is, okay, these guys aren't responsible, they're not taking leadership, and the second generation cries up first that, well, you're not giving us leadership. But you want to find, you just need to find a few who are influential leaders in respective generations, and work at it. The one example that's the example that's usually shared is a church in Northern Virginia called Open Door in Herndon, right? And so they have a very good intergenerational, multilingual kind of a church, and part of their success is the pastors have very tight relationships. So the leaders are very tight in holding the generations together. And the story goes, they have lunch together every day. And they go on personal retreats just to keep those relationships vital. And so,
did you say it's intergenerational? In the sense that there's first, second?
Yes, yes. But the glue is leadership, and the glue is relationship.
Is their leadership very intergenerational as well?
Yeah.
So you're saying leaders from each generation get together to collaborate for the best of everybody?
Yes.
Mind blown.
So if that's a secret sauce, that's,
So that does happen.
That's a secret sauce.
It's unbelievable.
And leaders. Yes.
Throwing a little Jesus in there and it'll work, man.
Jesus ain't something you throw around.
But see, if the leaders are open to it, okay, whether it's first or second generation, it happens on both sides. If they're not vested in doing that, then it's just going to be a fight. And then we all have bad church experience stories. We've all seen church splits.
You guys want to trade?
So if you've got leaders on both sides that want to make it work, then it could. It's hard work. Well, it's hard work either way.
What would you, what kind of suggestions would you have for, like at our church we're talking earlier today, we were talking about, you know, if the leadership over you, you know, wants the same thing that you want, they want the 20-somethings, and they, it's not like they don't care about them or anything, but the vision that they have is different than yours. And what you think is best, not you personally, but shovel of your belief, is best and better. What would you suggest in that sort of circumstance, or what kind of consequences, or what ways can you work through that? If the leadership above you, who has the ultimate authority, is looking in this direction, and you're looking in this direction, saying, I think this is best.
And that's what has to be worked through. I mean, that's what has to be worked through. Does the leadership in authority have the insight to realize it's a different vision, and perhaps God is stirring that up, bless it, and let it go? Or will the leader become fearful and insecure and force the other group to stay with the vision? Or thirdly, can both groups collaboratively work on a third vision that incorporates the best of both? And that's essentially your three options, right?
But not specifically speaking about an intergenerational congregation, but just where you have something for 20-somethings instead of, I mean, let's just say the vision for the people above us is sort of like bring them into this main service. Our vision is, no, let's create something for them where they can, and it's not, I don't know if it's an issue of like pride or whatever and all that. I think it's just a whole different paradigm of leadership, of how church is done, that you've been doing for the past 40 years or whatever, you know. How visions are developed, you know, God gives the vision to the leader, and the leader takes it and makes the people buy into it or whatever, you know. I mean, that's what I've been working with, and you got people here who are not necessarily going that way. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common organizational vision issue. Maybe the better question is, well, what's really going to reach them? That's kind of my backdoor approach. Is, I mean, we can kind of battle out the visions head to head, or we can say, well, what do we really need to do to reach them? I mean, churches can try to bring them into the main service. If that's not working, then you have to ask the question, well, what's going on, and what do we really need to do? What's important?
It's just hard because of the paradigm that someone has. Because, for instance, that's been brought up, and the leadership will say things like, "Where, well, if they're Christians, they love the family, they would come anyways. You know, why would they come? They love the family, or whatever. You know, however you want to put it. You know, so it's just hard because you're talking to people who have a whole, not totally different, but it almost seems foreign to you.
But is the church for Christians or for non-Christians? See, again, I'm going to push it that way. churches look very different when you're trying to reach lost people. And I've got a few years in a more traditional church where if people aren't going to service on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday evening, then they're backslidden or not being obedient or whatever. And there are churches like that, but their time will their time is limited.
He's looking at the camera, and recording.
No, actually, it's streaming. I don't think it's recorded, but someone else could be recording on the other side. One of the most compelling visuals I use when I do some of these presentations with church leaders is just architecture. There are so many church buildings of the previous generation that have just closed and been converted into restaurants, art galleries, daycare center, theaters, lofts. I mean, on one of those home improvement channels, they're talking about, boy, here's some creative ways to turn a church into your big living room and loft and all this stuff. And there's even one in Washington, D.C., where I used to live, that's been turned from a Baptist church into a mosque. And those are just very visually gripping things that say, if we don't reach people for Christ, that church is going to die, and the testimony of the previous generation is just obliterated. In Europe, you've got all these empty cathedrals, right? And that's a picture of our future if we don't let God do the work He wants done.
Do you see a lot of those churches becoming void and empty, the buildings themselves, with more and more with this whole ideology of the new wineskins, and our generation going out and doing our own thing, and then letting those churches kind of grow older and older and older and just die off? Do you think that's a really untapped resource that we are just through arrogance kind of just forgetting to use? Or do you see that the divisional divide almost kind of seems to, at least from my perspective, I've seen it kind of seems to be growing because of the inability for us to go in and either revitalize churches. Instead we just kind of toss them up and be like, okay, well, we'll just start a new ministry or a new thing here.
I mean, there's arrogance on both sides, possibly. But some of the really cool kingdom stories is when an older generation is willing to give that building to the next generation. I've seen I know of a handful of examples where that's happened. And so the one I know of the best is a church in Seattle, a young church that started out meeting in a warehouse and renovated it into a coffee house. And that building was actually right next door to the older dying church. I think the older church was maybe 75 or 80, Swedish, Norwegian background, and declining to about 75 people or something. And that church got in conversation with the old dying church got in conversation with the young church, and they merged, and the older church gifted the building and closed itself down, submitted themselves to the younger new leadership. The church is now thriving intergenerationally. It's become a beautiful story.
I guess a question I would have then do you see, as time is progressing, as these conversations are becoming more common, a move in the older generations to really want to open up dialogue with younger generations? Or do you see that happening quite a bit, or is it kind of still very stagnant, just still on the border? Or?
Still a tough conversation, but it's encouraging to hear there's a few more of those.
Mm-hmm.
But
talking about Quest.
It's a hard conversation. Yeah, I'm talking about Quest. I think Chris C., who's a pastor in Houston, Ecclesia, they were also gifted a church building. There was one in Bethesda that was the transition didn't go as well as both sides had hoped, but it was kind of a handoff to the next generation in Bethesda, but that's been a tougher transition. Ideally, the older generation will get pastoral care as they finish out their days, and then the new generation will get the gift of generosity. Because real estate costs are just going to keep getting higher. I'm anticipating we're not going to see more, or with our generation, we're not going to see as many building projects. And the next generation seems less interested in buildings and institutions. They want things to bear fruit in the relational and social justice sense. Want to talk about marriage?
I'm trying to keep that away. I'm just kidding.
Have you seen? I mean, it seems to me that our generation, or the younger generation, huh?
What's our generation?
Like,
Whatever.
Whatever.
His age.
When I say my generation, that's my youth group too, or no?
Well, I think the up and coming kind of maybe.
Postmodern generation?
I don't know if you can. I don't know.
Anyways,
young
next
people.
Gen Y.
Okay, people who use the internet more than people who don't. It seems like, in the sense of sharing the leadership, we're more open to it. Like, for example, just my personal opinion, like, it's cool to me that pastors would actually share the pulpit and having like 3-4 pastors. Have you seen that, like, work out with maybe an older generation where people are like, yeah, I'm willing to share the pulpit with the younger pastor, for example, and share the responsibilities of the church, or is it like resistance, threatening? What's going on here? Like, have you seen that?
There's both. Yeah, there's both. I don't have a research or a study of it, but I've seen both. So a good leader, well, I don't know if I want to use the word good, but a wise leader will keep in mind succession. So a wise leader will groom new leaders with him and after him. And the ones that are Lone Ranger, well, their time is limited. So the wise leader will open up opportunity for younger leaders to teach and to preach. But there's some risk involved there if there's already been a pattern for years where they're expected to benefit.
Or what was that risk?
Actually,
What's the risk?
If the church is has a track record or expectation of one leading voice, and then you start diluting it with some others, you may have a different mix of people. Some people may not be happy with that.
Of course.
And there may be risk. Any change you make is
That's right.
going to be risk, but also opportunity. So around here, like Rick Warren, he's raised up a couple other teaching pastors.
Angela asked a question about the younger leaders leading the older, or something to that extent. What about the younger leaders and the older leaders sharing leadership and working alongside each other? How can you make something like that work out, or is there any models you can point to?
younger leaders working together?
No, younger leaders.
Cathedral.
No, younger leaders working alongside, where leadership is shared with the older and the younger together.
Oh. Older and younger leaders sharing leadership.
Yeah.
Are you trying to think of an example right now?
Yeah, examples are more helpful, but
Of course.
Well, this isn't something I've looked into, but there's different models of leadership. So there's this is kind of organizational development.
Sure.
So kind of the stereotypical one is kind of a inverted triangle or triangle where you have one person that delegates authority to all the others and trickle down. It's probably more common. Hierarchy.
Okay.
Right. And then the idealists and us might think of a more team leadership idea. And there's a few churches that value that. So I spent a few years in the Plymouth Brethren tradition, where the more extreme ones don't even have pastors; they just have a board of elders.
That's cool.
And so it's a board of 3 to 8 guys, because they're traditional, that lead the church. So there's not one person that leads the church; it's actually a team of people that lead the church. There's a few examples that I've been looking into is where a church has a lead pastor who's mostly not in the pulpit. And that's an interesting mix to me, because there's a precedence and a stereotype that the preaching pastor is the vision caster and the senior pastor, but there's a few exceptions where the senior pastor and the lead pastor is not the one in the pulpit.
So you're saying in the fivefold ministry, there's a pastor and a teacher?
Yeah.
So there's 2 different roles.
Yeah.
There's 5. Because that always trips me out. I mean, every pastor I know is expected to be the teacher, but there's 2 different roles, right? There's pastor and there's teacher. So maybe.
Well, it depends on your exegesis. Yeah, I'm going to lean on the professor here. You know, is pastor teacher? Two words.
It is.
Two words.
And you know what's funny is I was reading a
Simple.
message yesterday.
Yeah.
And Eugene Peterson puts a hyphen in between it.
Oh,
So
see?
pastor dash teacher.
Yeah.
It's like it's one. And then I'm like, maybe that's a. We look at it. What do you think, Charles? You have an answer?
No, they've gone both ways.
I try after that.
I think that's only I'll take the hit.
Both ways, always.
It wasn't even an exhaustive list.
I'll take the hit on that.
Yeah.
I think God gives people in both ways.
You weren't a theologian, man. That was a theologian's answer right there. That was a Henry answer.
I think God can give people in both ways. Some are pastor teachers, and some are pastor leader. Some are pastor leader teacher. So the pastor teacher might have more gift than just the pastor and teacher.
So when Jesus sent out the 70, he sent them out to the different. Who was in charge?
God.
Jesus. No.
That's a good answer.
Jesus in the Bible. So I actually attend a church where the lead pastor is usually not in the pulpit.
That's cool.
Yeah, so Rock Harbor.
Yeah.
So Todd Proctor is the lead pastor, and then Mike Erie is teaching pastor. Mike Erie is in the pulpit probably 40 Sundays out of the year.
Are they
And they work collaboratively to make sure they're on sync in terms of vision.
denominational?
They are not, as far as I know. And there are some churches that are kind of covert denominational.
Yeah.
Like Mosaic
Yeah.
or Saddleback.
Or Loose.
Or ECC, man.
Covenant. Whatever you guys want us to do. We're whatever. Presbyterian. So DJ, you said like the number one thing that the 20s age gap is missing is mentoring or some type of support group. What's like the So if there's a top three, so if that's one, what's two others? Because you kind of mentioned like reaching people, right? Like the 20s age gap, because that they're not going to church, right? Because they kind of got disenfranchised or they didn't take ownership. So what's like the other two like main areas of like, I don't know, where they don't want, like what's the other two main reasons why they don't want to come to church besides not feeling love or support?
Can I interject? I'd love
Please.
to hear your thought. This is my what I've come up with, and I'd
Yeah.
love to hear
Okay.
what you think about this, because this
Okay.
is my little world.
Sure.
I see our generation, 20s, 30s, Christians love the Lord, walking away from church.
Right.
People I went to Bible college with,
Right.
people that were in full-time ministry, walking away from church, and impacting tradition, really, or what we do, why do we do what we do. And I think it's interesting that I grew up in church, and so did my husband. We grew up in a church that never really let you wrestle with your faith. They didn't say not to do it, but there was never opportunity maybe for you to wrestle through that. So I see lots of people walking away from church, not away from the Lord, because they never wrestled with things. They don't know why they do what they do anymore.
Right.
And I don't know if bridging the gap in the future is, if we're working with younger people, allowing opportunity for them to own their faith, to wrestle with things, to work things out. I don't know. That's just my little theory. Yeah, establish the value behind what you do, why you do, not just out of honor or respect, but because you've chosen. So that's just my little theory.
That's a good thought. So some of the newer churches that are reaching the 20-somethings do create that space for people to really explore. Well, why should they believe, and give them space to explore that? I think Rock Harbor does that pretty well, and that's why they've got a lot of 20-somethings.
I would say
You
too,
saw those pretty well.
like there's kind of been a movement even of, you kind of see it in politics too almost, because you see like a younger generation that is kind of moving away from traditional, like especially Christians, but maybe politically they don't think the same way that they're raised. And I can kind of see like from what you said, people that grew up in the church was somewhere you went to receive ideas, or this is like you came to learn, but it wasn't an active learning. Like you said, like you wasn't ever promoted to like wrestle with your faith or really ask questions, or it was never like a discussion type intimate. You came and you got your like lessons for the week. So, and I think, especially in our generation now, we're questioning a lot more, whether it be politics or life or faith. And I think people are kind of running away from the church because they don't see the church as a place of idea exchange or thought exchange or conversation. So I think people don't feel like, as somebody that just comes on a Sunday, that like you're really not active, because you're not in the background. But like it's not somewhere to promote your ideas or thoughts or questions. I'd say questions.
Well, because look at the era we live in. We're so inundated with instant access to every kind of information you'd ever want. To try to have an environment where you can't discuss things like that is like an imposter environment. To try to be someone who says this is the way it is, but there's no, like you said, the idea exchange. How can you exist like that? If everything else in our culture, we can figure it out on our own, like instantly. So I think that might be one of the.
To add to that, the kind of previous, for many generations, the church was modeled after a classroom.
Yeah.
And so your maturity was based on how much Bible trivia you knew. And you'd win those Bible quiz contests, and you go to Sunday school to reinforce that classroom metaphor. And now in the newer churches, I'm not sure we have Sunday schools anymore. I don't hear much about that anymore.
But is that a bad thing or a good thing?
It's a change.
Yeah, but it seems to.
Now that's not to say there aren't churches that are relevant to the 20-somethings that aren't very strong doctrinally. So two things are happening. There are churches that are reaching people by creating a lot of space for discussion and exploring. There are also young New Calvinist churches that are very strong doctrinally and teaching driven that are attracting young people as well. So the way I describe what seems to be happening is the faith has to be very strong and polarized. So you can't have this wishy-washy kind of faith. It's got to be polarized, whether it's strong teaching or strong exploration or strong orthodoxy. So there's a resurgence of Orthodox churches now. There's a Campus Crusade guy who left his evangelical mainstream thing into this Orthodox road-wearing kind of thing. And then fundamentalists is another pole. So these are poles that are just surging. People are gravitating towards. And different reasons for that. Some is because we're in a world that's so pluralistic and diverse that people have to grab onto something. And we're much more in touch with our feelings. We're leaving that rationalistic scientific worldview that the world is more holistic, and we're getting in touch with our intuition and feelings. And so spirituality doesn't connect with that in a passionate kind of way. It's not connecting. It seems to be.
Maybe one or two more questions, and we'll wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so.
It's the fastest growing church in America right now.
Oh,
second to our church.
Right.
Maybe new numbers?
Outreach Magazine keeps coming up with a new list every year. Well, there was a list that was just published 2 weeks ago, I think. Top 10 largest churches in the U.S. I don't know if it's the fastest growing, but there are 10 large ones.
DJ, I would love to hear.
I could get you a list.
No, that's cool. I mean, one of them is like Joel Osteen's church.
Yeah, that's the largest. 40,000 plus.
What? Damn it. Serious.
Actually, that's a great question for my colleague, Dr. Warren Bird. He's got a doctorate in megachurch research.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He just came back from a trip to Korea. Visited these churches with 100,000.
You're right.
Yes, Angela.
I think I'm sure you must have a lot of stories from your experience, and that's sort of what I'm interested in. I want to hear your stories, and we don't have much time left. But is there maybe one experience that you had where your thinking was totally shifted just from your work, like in your interaction with somebody, or just I don't know, something that some story you always go back to, where maybe your thinking was totally altered, or just a memorable learning point for you?
No, I appreciate the invitation for my stories. I think I'm a slow learner, so I don't have. I think one of my crises of faith is I kept looking for the Damascus Road experience, and I didn't have those. I did have mentors that came along in my life and spoke into my life. I see myself as pretty broken, so I needed a lot of help, and I still need as much help as I can get to make it through life. And something I'm working through, and actually I kind of blogged about it a little bit, that as God's opened up all these new opportunities for leadership, more than I anticipated or expected, and I didn't really plan for, that I'm relearning to tell my own story in a way that is more concrete and specific, because I gravitate towards ideas and theories, and so it's easier for me to do that, but then it doesn't connect with people. So I think just telling my own story, of figuring out what it means to be a leader has been a long process for me. Having mentors along the way that saw more value in me than I saw in myself. So probably the biggest turning point one for me was a Navy senior chief that I met through a bulletin board. So this is a precursor to internet. I used to be online through modem to modem. I mean, this is like antique, right? Okay, this is back in the day when you had typewriters, manual typewriters. And so modem, and I was fresh out of college, and I dialed up to his bulletin board. He invited me over for dinner, and he became my father figure. Now, in a traditional Chinese family, I didn't really have a relationship with my dad. So to have this older man who would show me hospitality and saw value in me and affirmed me transformed my life. And he was the one that prayed me to seminary. He was the one that called me out on why I kept having my pity parties. Because I can be very hard on myself. I have been. I've had many years of practice doing that. And so just to have that relationship over 2.5 years was very redemptive. So that's probably the biggest turning point. And then I've had other ones throughout my life. I move around quite a bit, and then now I travel quite a bit, so my relationships tend to be seasonal. So sometimes I'm jealous of people that have friendships over decades, but sometimes I'm not, because then they're stuck with those relationships. They have a hard time networking and growing outside of that. But that's one I'll share, and I go back to.
Great. Well, can we thank DJ for his time?
Did we get most of it?
Got all of it.
Okay, cool.